most adopted data sharing platform. In essence, what we allow our customers to do is we grant them interoperable data product management, access, and governance across every major cloud and data platform. I am somewhat thinking of a live rebrand though. What was it? Is it data sharing for the internet? Is that what your guys' term was? Is it kind of like the beyond cloud region? Alright, that is now being workshopped. Let's figure out a data sharing platform for the internet. But I was thinking of it as Michael was talking, because that was a great presentation. I feel like I've given some version of it a few times. And I was kind of reflecting, as I look at it, we're all in this like hyper-competitive space where every company is trying to first create some value, I lost reference from Reno there, and not even worry about monetization. And then you want to figure out a way to capture some of that value for yourself. And then eventually you want to build a moat. But one company's moat is another company's lock-in. Right? And then we all come around and we're desperately looking for how can we attack these new vectors where our customers are very angry about lock-in. Another thing that I realized that I've been building in space for quite some time is another term for lock-in is also just something that just works. Right? It's like just these capabilities. You've got kind of the negative lock-in and trying attacks, but you also have the lock-in of, hey, we built an enormous amount of product here, and make this hard problem just easy. Right? I think most people here, at least an easy chapter here for the first instance. Right? Snowflake is not cheap to compute, it's not the most powerful, it's not the most advanced. It is the one that works the best though. Right? I don't know, for a company that operates an enormous number of Snowflake and Databricks, BigQuery, and Redshift, and S3, and SFTP accounts is by far the business. But a lot of what they've done in trying to make things easy really is forcing you to live within your ecosystem. And one of the things that I realized when I founded Bobsled around 3.5 years ago is that some of those problems are actually made significantly worse when you force people to be within these walled gardens. So Bobsled came about to try to break down the walled gardens of data access. Right? So another way to think of it is, how would you attack the problem of data interoperability if you didn't first build a giant egress-free fiber optic network across the entire planet? And the answer is Bobsled. Right? So what Bobsled does, you don't have any slides to see here, but I'll tell you about it, is we started with the companies that have the most existential problem around data sharing. Right? So any company in which at least a significant part of the core value they offer to their customers is data, has a massive problem in how do my customers get access to that data. So about 3-4 years ago, pretty much all of the data access in the world for analytics, machine learning, etc., was still going through either an SFTP or a horrendously maintained API. Right? APIs are amazing for application interfaces, but if what you're looking to do is enable someone to interact with large volumes of flexible data in arbitrary ways, APIs are actually pretty terrible. So what you ended up with was 4-year-old technology, right? File transfer protocol of just files being downloaded off of the internet and then re-uploaded to it, in generating hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue, petabytes and petabytes of data. So enter Snowflake. They came up with a concept that had been around for 20 years, but they figured out how to package it well for Snowflake sharing, which was let's create a cloud-native, data platform-native way for data to be accessed across organizations. And they just made it really easy to say, if you're both in Snowflake, this is perfect. You don't need to ship data, you don't need to get write access, you're not tossing files over the wall. You can really create data as a service. Right? Your customer can query data from your account and everything just works. And it took off really well. I was at Microsoft and I was told we need to be doing the exact same thing, figure out what we do, right? How do we make Azure data sharing ecosystem? And I looked up, Databricks was doing the exact same thing, Google was doing the exact same thing, and Amazon had already done the exact same thing. And basically you just had this promise of the internet, right? That's all coming together, being carved up into these fiefdoms, these walled gardens. And often the lock-in really wasn't a tax, right? Snowflake doesn't really charge you much to get data out. It just makes it really, really hard, right? About as hard as they get. So we started in 2022 by going after the world's largest data companies and saying, hey, we are going to offer you true interoperability, and it's just going to work. And the way that we decided to do that is, I mean, there's generally 2 ways that we can approach an interoperability issue. You can either try to create a new standard, and try to get that adopted, and try to totally decouple this, and then later figure out how to monetize it by significant certification for that. So we went after, we had to solve the data type problem. So what we decided to do was actually leverage the mechanisms of the platforms and say, look, Snowflake understands the best way to leverage permissions within Snowflake. Databricks understands the best way to access governance and permissions within Databricks. The same thing with AWS, within Azure, etc. So what we allow our customers to do is just have a footprint in all of these different platforms and to leverage the access mechanisms, governance, and observability of those platforms without having to manage all of those infrastructure pipelines and permissions themselves. It's been going pretty well. We now work with 3 of the 5 world's largest financial exchanges, major data companies like Bradstreet, ZoomInfo, CoreLogic, major software platforms like Pendo, and what we have ended up building is interoperable mission-critical infrastructure that needs to just work for this workload, which is either as hard as it sounds or way harder than you're imagining. Right? And these are probably what I want to talk about for today is we recently are sharing the process of replatforming as many of our customers as we can to Web 2. Right? So the second we saw the ability to break this tax of internet leaving one data center and going into the other, which has actual no real cost to this platform, we got really excited. So we started looking at, okay, what can we do to take our existing architecture, which is kind of point to point. We would have a company say, our customers say, I have these objects in Snowflake. I would like them to be in Databricks, or I'd like them to be in S3. And instead, move to being more opinionated store of data. Saying if what you need to do is distribute data, you should store it in a table format. You should make sure that you're leveraging the access, permission, and governance of where that data is going to be accessed. And if at all possible, you should do it on a platform that doesn't charge you a tax and move data around constantly. And what we found is that all of the building blocks were here, but that there's an enormous amount of work that you need to do. Yeah, so you need to actually bring these building blocks together to do a service that actually solves the problem. So what we have built, I'm going to look at my architecture, but no one else is allowed to, is a service that plugs into any data source in which you are creating and managing data products. And allows you to materialize those tables, files, what have you, into an external data catalog that lives within R2. So we replicate that data to one cold copy source in Iceberg over R2. We then give you a SQL interface to allow you to generate entitled slices. So one of the things that we found, any company that generates and distributes data of any type of scale, you're very rarely saying, hey, here's 5 petabytes of data, have fun. Right? Generally what you're saying is you are entitled to this aspect of this data, you're entitled to this slice, and now I'm going to allow you to access this where it lives. So we give you a SQL engine to do that, and then we make that data interoperable from whatever compute engine the customer use. So if you want to give a customer a Snowflake share, they can query that data directly over our system. If you want to give a Databricks share, if you want to write that data into a different file format, use their S3 bucket, or if for some godforsaken reason you still want to put it into an SFTP, you can do that and maintain only one copy of that data. So the building blocks were already there, right? The sharing mechanisms of these data cloud platforms exist and are mature. Iceberg is beginning to get adoption. I think it's got a lot more hype than it has real usage now. There's quite a bit left to go before I think we can really say there's a truly interoperable store, but you have something that's at least supported by major platforms, and you now have one existing zero egress network that you can plug into to pull the tax out of this. What we found, though, is there's still a decent amount of work that we built around it. So the first thing we have to do is if you are going to make this data governed and accessible in a way that any major organization will allow for it, you actually have to do account and infrastructure management. Right? So if you're going to say, I'm going to push entitlement and access to Snowflake, you need a Snowflake account. If you're going to push it to Azure, you unfortunately need an Azure account, and et cetera, et cetera. So what we enable our customers to do is to have this interoperable account and infrastructure management that they can easily provision, spin up, and spin down accounts wherever they need it. Second, we're really excited for the Iceberg API that we have and compaction services. Going to need you to build a whole lot more though before we can swap out our other compute engines. Looking forward to working together on that. But basically, it's super easy to say you're going to get data in an iceberg. In reality, it's not as easy as you think. Because data is constantly messy, it comes from a million different sources, and once you write it, you realize you need to rewrite it. The problem with doing all of that, if compute is not Cloudflare, is you are ripping that data out and then egressing it right back. So we had to find a way in which we have a flexible compute engine to get data into iceberg. We are going to be killing our engine that was going to do any of the compaction. You also need a compute engine to transform that data going out. If you want to offer any services like, I want this to be in CSV or Parquet or only a specific aspect of that. So you do need to have a compute engine that runs over that data, even if it's not your core data platform query. The question I asked around how are you going to monetize, just three pieces of advice: compute. Compute is a great call. That would be how I would go after it. You'd be surprised how much you need to do anything on the internet. But we need to have something flexible there. We also need the ability to create these flexible entanglements. Right? So if you think of how data access has been governed for the past decade or so, it's mostly for the chief compliance officer. Right? The majority of data catalogs were not built for actual data users in mind. They were built so that someone in the CEO's office could say, where's the PII and who has access to it. The way data is generally actually permissioned, especially if the data has any value, it's at a much more granular level. So you need the ability to basically create what we call data products. You can really think of it as like an external data catalog. So it's not how do I share it with my colleague, it's how do I share this data with the ecosystem. You need much more granular controls. And then finally, telemetry and observability, which are two words that mean an infinite number of things to an infinite number of companies. But basically, I've learned that a synonym for data sharing platform is a data exfiltration platform. So if you're going to sell a data exfiltration platform to regulated industries, you better be able to tell people constantly where is your data, what is happening to it, who is accessing it, and turn those things on. So we spent about 2.5 years, I'd say, really building out the account and infrastructure management and kind of the data type and data structure translation between everything. And we spent the last year building out this external data catalog and zero AWS network. And together it's been going very well, right? So like I said, we have just about every major industry vertical, at least one of the top 2 data players in our running on mission critical infrastructure. We're looking to expand that out now. We're a little bit backwards of going from purely enterprise to more developer focused as more and more companies are generating data from their applications and looking to share those. And we are looking forward to working with the folks at Cloudflare to take the amazing building blocks that you built and turn them into something that can actually break up that moat because it just works. Thank you very much.